Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Her husband left Amara and their one-year-old daughter without any money in a rented apartment. 3 years later, when he decided to mock his ex-wife, he was stunned. Amara adjusted the blanket on her sleeping daughter. The little girl was sleeping so sweetly, so peacefully. She felt safe. After all, her mom was nearby. For a child who had just turned 1, there was nothing more needed for happiness. And Amara felt she simply had to ensure her little girl's safety, to give her everything necessary for a happy childhood. Yes, the responsibility was immense. When she first found out about her pregnancy, she hadn't even thought about the fact that parenthood was such a huge responsibility. Probably because Farron, the father of their child, was by her side. It was assumed that all the worries and troubles would be shared between the two parents. And that made things not so difficult. Amara believed that Farron would be a wonderful father. After all, he had promised. It was Farron who dreamed of having a child, who asked for it, who wanted to become a father as soon as possible. Amara, she would have waited a bit longer herself, until they got on their feet, got their own apartment. But her husband assured her that many people live in rented homes and still become parents. Everything will come in time, he assured. Right now, we are at the best age to become parents. And children are a powerful motivator to achieve something. Farron spoke passionately and convincingly, and Amara didn't even notice how she began to share her husband's point of view. She trusted him a lot back then and believed that everything her husband said was the ultimate truth. Amara had a complicated story. She grew up without a mother from birth. Her mother died the same day Amara was born, complicated childbirth. Initially, the girl's upbringing was taken care of by her father and his mother, Amara's grandmother, and then by her father alone, as her grandmother passed away. Amara barely remembered her, she was still very young. Soon after, a woman named Teresa appeared in their home, brought by her father. He was, of course, tired of living alone. And it was hard for him to combine work with taking care of a small child. Feelings probably played their role too. Amara saw that her father was really in love with Teresa. And she was a little jealous. Now her father rarely paid attention to her. All his attention was first given to his new wife, and then to their new children. Amara somehow naturally faded into the background. So, Amara got a stepmother. Initially, they seemed to have a good, warm relationship. Teresa enjoyed walking with her stepdaughter, dressing her up like a doll. She liked her new role as a mother and wife. Teresa had long wanted to get married, but somehow it never worked out. Her suitors were not serious, not in a hurry to propose. Teresa's friends had long been nursing children, but she still hadn't managed to. And now she had a family, a nice, non-drinking, well-earning husband by the standards of their small town, and a beautiful, sweet stepdaughter. A doll Teresa had dreamed of since childhood. Then Teresa had her own daughter, Medina. Amara was sincerely happy for her sister. A sibling was such a joy. But soon the girl realized that her stepmother and, most painfully, her father, now directed all their main attention and love towards Medina. Teresa completely immersed herself in her long-awaited motherhood. Amara was now only given short orders and reproaches. Reproaches for being too noisy, for not washing the dishes, for not cleaning her room. Her father would come home from work, greet his elder daughter with a glance, and immediately rush to Medina's crib. He and Teresa would stand there quietly discussing how the baby spent her day and admiring their miracle. Amara tried to join them. She was also enchanted by her sister. But she quickly began to feel out of place. She was like a fifth wheel in this family. 2 years after Medina was born, Amara also got a brother, Jose. Her father was overjoyed. Finally, a long-awaited son was born. A heir, a pride and support. Stepmother was also besotted with the baby. Now Amara became something like a nanny for Medina. Teresa didn't care whether her stepdaughter had done her homework, had any activities after school, or wanted to go out with friends. No. If the stepmother needed free time, Medina was handed over to Amara without discussion. And later, when Jose grew up, Amara looked after both children. However, the girl never received any gratitude for her efforts. It was taken for granted, the older sister takes care of the little ones. What's the big deal? But Amara longed for praise, for her father and Teresa to at least slightly appreciate what she did. It wasn't easy at all to look after two lovely but very active and curious little ones. You needed eyes in the back of your head. Medina and Jose were the darlings of the family. Her father's eyes shone especially when he looked at them. Teresa couldn't hold back her smile when interacting with the little ones. But Amara, she seemed to be an outsider in her own home. No one was interested in her opinion, no one wanted to hear about her problems. As for the girl's desires and dreams, they were never considered. Amara got used to playing second fiddle. It was painful, hurtful, and uncomfortable. And the stepmother constantly made her feel guilty about something. No matter how hard Amara tried, she couldn't earn her approval. The girl intuitively felt that the atmosphere in the house was shaped by Teresa. If she loved her stepdaughter, her father would treat her with more warmth. But Teresa, it was impossible to reach her heart. Soon, Amara stopped trying. By then, Amara was already in middle school. The girl decided she would definitely go to college after finishing school. She didn't even dream of university. She knew it was unlikely that the adults would support her for that long. She wanted to get a profession as soon as possible, to stand on her own feet, and leave the family where she had become a stranger. Even Medina and Jose, when they grew up, started treating their older sister the same way their parents did. She was someone of second class, and something like a free maid to them. Amara threw herself into her studies, and it was hard. In recent years, she hadn't had time for lessons. Lots of housework, worries about her stepmother and father. The former excellent student quickly turned into a lagging one. And now, Amara was diligently making up for lost time, staying late in the school library and studying textbooks. It was quiet and peaceful there. No one could make her clean up the children's room or take them for a walk. In the end, Amara accomplished what she once thought impossible. She improved her grades, passed her exams well. The teachers praised her, but her father and stepmother, as usual, didn't notice the success of their eldest. After all, Medina had performed on stage with a dance group for the first time, and Jose had learned to ride a two-wheeled bicycle. They had no time for Amara. The years of studying flew by quickly. Amara now returned home after dark. She preferred to do her homework and prepare for exams at her new friends' houses or in the library. This gave her a better chance of finishing her studies. She enjoyed learning, easily and gladly absorbing new knowledge, and with each passing day, she became more certain that she had made the right choice. She wanted to start working as soon as possible. Amara knew she would make an excellent elementary school teacher, and her practical classes in school only confirmed this belief. The children listened to Amara with bated breath. She knew how to find an approach to each child, even those considered difficult by other teachers. Her classes easily grasped new topics. Amara intuitively knew how to convey information to children so they would definitely understand it. Overall, she was eager to start working. And she was almost as eager to move out of her parents' house, become independent, and no longer feel like a stranger in her own home. So, upon receiving her diploma, Amara packed her things and set off for a new life. Her stepmother probably sighed with relief. Finally, there would be one less person in the house. At last, they would live as a tight-knit family of 4. Her father also seemed to be happy. That's right, well done. Teresa praised Amara, probably for the first time in her life. You're an adult now, no need to sit on our necks. It's time for you to make your own way in life. Just don't count too much on financial help from us. You're of age, make your own way. We're starting a renovation, so we won't be able to help you. Amara nodded. By then, she had already realized that she was on her own. She couldn't expect any help from her family. No one loved her here, no one cared about her. Even the house they lived in was now in Teresa's and her father's name. Her wise stepmother had made sure in time that nothing would go to the stranger girl, having prepared all the necessary documents. Amara left her home with a light backpack on her shoulders and a small amount of money in her pocket for the first while. She had saved this money from her scholarship over the year, and it should have been enough to rent the simplest accommodation in the city. This was the most significant expense, and Amara could live very frugally. She managed to rent a room in a dormitory. Her first neighbors were immigrants who didn't speak Spanish and a large family of alcoholics. The walls in the former barracks were thin, the wallpaper was peeling off in chunks, and the floors creaked terribly. The most inconvenient part was that the kitchen and bathroom were shared on the floor. The conditions, of course, were hardly acceptable. But Amara, surprisingly, still felt happy and free. She no longer had to endure Teresa's nagging, her father's indifference, and she didn't have to try to please everyone. She didn't feel like an outsider or constantly at fault. Amara hoped she wouldn't stay there long. She would find a job and be able to rent a separate apartment. Even if it was small, it would be isolated. And then her life would truly become wonderful. Amara started looking for a job. She had a diploma with honors and more than excellent recommendations from the school principals where she had done her practical training. Amara was eager to work and teach children. But she faced difficulties she wasn't prepared for. In the gymnasiums and lyceums, where the salaries were good, they required experienced employees. Amara hadn't worked a single day yet. Some public schools were willing to take her, but they offered almost poverty-level salaries since she had no work experience. "You have to start somewhere," the principal of one of these schools said, spreading her hands. They were short of elementary school teachers, so she was trying her best to interest the young graduate. "You'll work for a while, gain experience, and then you'll get raises. Why hurry? You have everything ahead of you." Amara just shook her head. The principal was simply unaware of her situation. Amara couldn't wait, she needed money. The girl was almost in despair. She had a clear plan, a clear understanding of how her life would unfold. And now everything was falling apart, shattered by life's realities. Staying in the dormitory for long was simply dangerous with such neighbors. There wasn't even enough money for food. Amara needed a much higher salary than what she was offered. So, she decided to try herself in a completely different field. Amara became a market vendor. Krista, a middle-aged woman with bleached white hair and a hoarse voice, hired her. She had several stalls in the market, selling clothes purchased cheaply from a factory in Turkey. Quality items were sold at a high markup. Krista was constantly opening new stalls, so she needed sellers. Working in the market was not what Amara dreamed of. She wanted to teach children, see curious eyes every day, answer hundreds of questions, and come up with holiday scenarios for the class. She hadn't given up on her dream entirely, no. She considered working in the market just a first step. Amara planned to save money to rent an apartment for a year and then get a job at a school. Even if the salary was small, it didn't matter. The main thing was to be a teacher. Everything else would follow. Krista paid Amara well, and the girl also received a small percentage of the sales. This motivated the sellers to work more productively. The work was generally not difficult. The only thing that bothered her was the material responsibility. And it was also hard to carry the unsold goods to the warehouse at the end of the day. By the way, it was thanks to these bags that Amara met Farron. That evening, the girl couldn't wait for the cart that sellers used to transport heavy items. Either it broke or someone took it. So, Amara realized she would have to drag the huge cloth bag to the warehouse herself. She put on gloves to protect her hands and started dragging her load on the ground. At first, it was fine, but then her back and legs started to hurt, and she saw spots before her eyes. And to make matters worse, there was no one around to help her. Amara had stayed late, and the market was already quiet and deserted. It was hard to believe that just a couple of hours ago, it had been bustling with life. And then, "Miss, what are you doing? Why are you, such a delicate girl, carrying such a heavy load. Amara turned around and saw a young man approaching her, tall, handsome, with slightly wavy chestnut hair and laughing green eyes. He wore a simple black t-shirt that emphasized his muscular build and blue jeans. He looked incredibly good in them. Where did he come from? Later, Amara learned that Farron was walking nearby with friends and saw Amara through the fence bars, stubbornly dragging her load like a determined ant. Farron didn't like this sight. A delicate, pretty girl and a heavy bag. He easily jumped over the fence and offered his help. Amara gratefully agreed. She understood that she wouldn't have the strength to drag the bag to the warehouse. Farron carried the heavy load as if it were just a regular grocery bag. The muscles in his arms tensed and stood out clearly. It was obvious the young man practiced some kind of sport. Later, Amara found out that Farron went to the gym. "Thank you so much," Amara smiled at her helper when the bag was in the warehouse. "You're welcome. It's always nice to help a girl, especially such a beautiful one," Farron replied. Amara felt herself blushing. This compliment from a charming stranger made a strong impression on her. She really wanted the guy to ask her name. And as if reading her mind, the young man did just that. He suggested they get to know each other. Not long ago, Amara had felt exhausted like a squeezed lemon, a whole day in the heat, at the market, then dragging that heavy bag. But when Farron suggested a little walk, she suddenly felt a surge of energy, as if wings had grown on her back. They wandered the city streets, talking, laughing, getting to know each other. It turned out that Farron had recently graduated from university and now worked as an economist for an air conditioning installation company. The salary, as he himself said, was low. Not the kind of earnings Farron had dreamed of, but what could he do? Without experience, no one hired a fresh graduate. Amara understood her new acquaintance like no one else. She was in the same situation. But Farron had his mother's support. He lived with her. She paid the utilities and bought groceries. So, Farron could afford to work for peanuts, but in his field, to gain experience, and then spread his wings fully. But Amara, she had to survive and fend for herself. There was no help to expect from her father and stepmother. Farron, learning Amara's story, felt even more sympathetic towards her. "Now I want to protect and take care of you," he told her. "You know, I really need that." They started dating. Now Farron would come to the market every day after work. He helped Amara pack things and take them to the warehouse, then they would go for a walk. Sometimes they went to the movies, sometimes to a park on the other side of the city. Or they strolled along the embankment, holding hands. Farron sometimes complained about his strict bosses, low salary, and that his mother couldn't understand that her son had grown up and kept trying to control him as if he were still 12 or 13. Amara supported her beloved as best she could. During that time, the girl was incredibly happy. Well, of course. Finally, there was someone who cared about her. Farron gave her flowers, took her to cafes, was interested in her affairs. It was so unusual and so pleasant. Amara's head was spinning with emotions. Sometimes she couldn't believe it was all happening to her. Farron moved in with Amara. By that time, she was already renting a decent apartment, a cozy one-room place in a residential area near the market. The barracks with dubious neighbors were a thing of the past. It happened gradually and naturally. At first, Farron stayed overnight, then gradually the apartment began to fill with his things, a toothbrush, a razor, some clothes. Amara herself suggested that he stay permanently. She liked falling asleep and waking up in Farron's arms, liked cooking him breakfast, liked feeling his care and love. So, why should they part if they could live together? Farron was happy to move out from his mother's place. "She's already worn me out with her demands," he shared the details with his beloved. It seemed that Farron's mother was a domineering woman, used to keeping everything under her control. Amara was even a little afraid of her in advance. Farron continued to work at his air conditioning company. His duties included making calculations. The work was tedious, not very interesting, not requiring high qualifications. Farron's salary was about 3 times less than Amara's. The girl worried that he might feel insecure about it. She didn't want anything to overshadow their relationship. But Farron took the situation correctly. He told Amara that this was just the beginning. I'll gain experience, then find something better. With my education, it's not a problem. It's just that fresh graduates are reluctantly hired anywhere. Amara agreed with every word of her beloved. He was right, she was in the same situation. But she had to work at the market since she didn't have the family support that Farron did. And his mother, whatever she was, still helped her son. True, she had many demands on him, but that's what parents are for. Amara was used to such things. Krista, Amara's blonde employer, called her employee a love-struck fool. Look how well your Farron has settled in. Sits in an office from 9 to 5, shuffling papers, getting pennies, not striving for anything more. First, he lived off his mother, now he's moved on to you. That's not true. You're seeing it all wrong. Am I wrong? Of course. I can see right through people. You're wrong, Krista. Amara defended her relationship. Sure. Then answer me a few questions. Who pays for the apartment? I do, but who stocks the fridge with food? Whose money is used for groceries? Mostly mine, but and him? What's his contribution to your joint budget? What does your precious Farron spend on? He bought me flowers yesterday, Amara blurted out. And he also ordered sushi for us in the evening. And he pays for his gym membership. Krista merely smirked and shook her head thoughtfully. Amara tried to ignore the comments from acquaintances that Farron was living off her. That's how it seemed from the outside, but Farron was working. He had a plan to gain experience and then seek a higher-paying position. He was still young, with everything ahead of him. The main thing was that Farron loved her. He often told her this. Loved her like no one else. It was so nice to feel needed by someone. For this feeling, Amara was ready to endure any temporary difficulties. She was confident these difficulties were temporary. Krista and the others just couldn't appreciate the significance of mutual feelings. They hadn't felt unwanted and superfluous in their own family like Amara had. So they couldn't understand how important and valuable it was to be with a loved one. They couldn't truly understand this. Time passed, and Farron and Amara lived together as a couple. He often said that he was happy now. With you, I feel strong, I feel calm and good next to you, not under my mother's pressure. We understand each other with a glance. It's incredible, something I've never experienced. It's very valuable. Amara smiled, feeling the same way. Every day she mentally thanked fate for sending her Farron. Farron often went out to his friends at night. Amara didn't know these guys, Farron hadn't introduced them, but she accepted her beloved's lifestyle. Yeah, you wouldn't be interested. Just my guys, our men's company. Sometimes guys need to gather like this. You understand? Of course, Amara understood. She liked that her beloved valued friendship so much. And the fact that he had many friends was good. It meant Farron was a pleasant and sociable person. Besides, Amara didn't suffer from a lack of attention from him, so it would be silly to be jealous of his friends. One evening, Farron came home in a disturbed state. Amara knew he was supposed to visit his mother after work. And so he did. She says I'm immature and childish. Farron shared his feelings with his beloved. She called me spineless, can you imagine? My own mother. She's always scolding me. Since childhood, I haven't been good enough for her, I do everything wrong. She still considers me a child, and capable of manly deeds. You know what? Let's get married. Amara couldn't believe her ears, it was as if an icy hand gripped her heart. She was breathless. What? What did you say? Let's get married, Farron repeated more calmly and confidently. You see, I've wanted to propose to you for a long time, just thought I'd choose a better moment, set it up beautifully and romantically. But it just came out. So, what do you say? Will you marry me? Yes, of course, yes. Amara threw herself into Farron's arms, trying to hold back her tears. For her, this proposal was yet another and the most significant proof of his love. Now she would finally have a real family. They began preparing for the wedding. These were pleasant concerns, although the young couple was financially constrained. The time came for Amara to meet her future mother-in-law, Senora Sancha. Amara was afraid of this meeting. From Farron's words, it seemed his mother was a domineering woman, used to keeping everyone and everything under control. How would she perceive a potential daughter-in-law, especially one without a dowry, from a tiny provincial town? Senora Sancha invited her son and his fiancée to dinner. How nervous Amara was. She spent a long time choosing an outfit. She wanted to look both striking and refined, and restrained. Senora Sancha turned out to be older than Amara had thought. It was clear she had given birth to her son at a mature age. Amara's father and stepmother were much younger. Senora Sancha behaved impeccably polite but cold. Like an English queen. She spoke reservedly, listened more than she talked, and asked questions. Amara kept trying to understand if she liked her future mother-in-law. Senora Sancha herself almost frightened her. The woman was already retired, having worked for a long time as a department head at a factory. Her managerial position must have left its mark on her. Farron said his mother had to retire due to a serious heart condition. But Senora Sancha looked perfectly healthy. Perhaps you rushed with the decision to marry? Farron's mother finally said. What? Why, her son immediately retorted. Maybe you should get more settled first? Farron, you don't earn enough to support a family. You're not ready yet. Amara was petrified, goosebumps running down her spine. She sat silently, not knowing how to react. One thing was clear, Farron's mother was against their marriage. Amara's premonitions were not wrong. Senora Sancha didn't like her, too poor, too simple. Senora Sancha, the former department head, who raised a worthy son and gave him a prestigious and in-demand higher education, surely dreamed of a different match for Farron. A girl from a well-off family, perhaps the daughter of influential parents. But here was Amara. Farron argued with his mother, giving her argument after argument that he was already grown up and independent. Senora Sancha suddenly shifted the conversation to another topic, and the evening went on. But Amara's mood was already spoiled. His mother did not approve of her and made it clear right away. The main thing, of course, was that Farron loved her. But still, Amara wanted his mother to accept her as well. Later that evening at home, Amara and Farron discussed the meeting with Senora Sancha. Farron was angry and upset. She doesn't understand that I'm already an adult and free to live my life as I see fit, he fumed. The young couple decided not to hold a big celebration for their wedding. They just signed the papers and then had a quiet dinner at a restaurant. This was because they realized they couldn't afford a grand event. Farron earned peanuts, and Amara's salary went towards rent and groceries. Senora Sancha couldn't or wouldn't help the young couple, claiming her savings were for medical treatment. Amara's father and Teresa also made it clear that they couldn't help financially, as they had just renovated their new apartment. But Amara wasn't too concerned about the banquet, white dress, and decorated cars. The most important thing was having her beloved by her side. Amara and Farron began living as a real family. Not much changed in their daily life, but now Amara proudly wore a wedding ring on her finger and got used to her new, unfamiliar last name. They rarely crossed paths with Senora Sancha. Farron would sometimes visit his mother after work to pick up some things from home and chat. Occasionally, Senora Sancha invited the newlyweds for family dinners. She no longer expressed dissatisfaction with her son's marriage, but one instance had been enough for Amara. During that first visit to her mother-in-law, she felt out of place. Senora Sancha remained cold, reserved, and impeccably polite, like a prim and proper dowager countess. She didn't interfere in the young couple's affairs, discussing only trivial matters. These family dinners felt overly formal and tense. Amara always wished the meals would end quickly so they could go home. After some time, Farron brought up the topic of having children. "We've been married for almost 6 months," he said during dinner one evening. "Maybe it's time to think about having kids? It seems about time." "Do you want a child?" Amara asked, her breath catching. She dreamed of having a baby, but there were so many buts. "Why not? I've always dreamed of having a son. We could go for walks, play football, and I'd take him on camping trips like Raphael did with his son Elias. Wouldn't that be great? But raising a child requires a lot of money. And Amara spread her hands. She could have reminded Farron about the utility bills and stretching their money until payday, the fact that their apartment was too small and needed repairs, and that it was a rental with rising rent. There were many things Amara could have mentioned, but why? Farron was aware of their situation. "Yeah, I understand," her husband agreed. "We're not in the best position right now, but it's temporary. You know I have a good education, I can easily find a better job." He continued talking about how children are a powerful motivator and how he would move mountains for their child. It sounded convincing. Besides, Amara had long wanted a baby. Many of her friends were already caring for their little ones, chubby-cheeked darlings that made her heart ache with longing. So, Amara decided it was time. Financial difficulties could be overcome, and she had reliable and loving Farron by her side. He promised to do everything for their family, so why not? Soon, Amara found out she was pregnant. She was surprised and scared, thinking it would take longer. But then an overwhelming happiness replaced her worries. Farron was also happy. He started taking better care of his wife, buying lots of fruit, ensuring she didn't lift heavy things, and every evening he would help at the market, carrying things to the storage. Locals even started calling him a porter. Amara had to leave her job well before maternity leave because she had some pregnancy complications. The doctor insisted on a more relaxed routine. Amara's job at the market required her to be outside in all weather, reach for high-hanging items, and sometimes move heavy boxes. The doctor said this could lead to premature labor. Fortunately, Amara had managed to save a small amount for a rainy day. Without her salary, they were struggling even more. Farron still earned very little. He was looking for a better-paying job, but hadn't had any luck yet. Either they overload you with work and responsibilities, or they offer training. Farron fumed after another interview. Despite financial difficulties, he didn't stop meeting with friends, which often cost a significant amount. He essentially spent his small salary on outings with friends, and possibly not just with friends. Amara suspected there were girls in the group, having heard female voices when she called her husband. Farron, who promised to move mountains for their child, wasn't managing well. Amara's appearance saddened him. Pregnancy didn't flatter her, with pimples on her forehead, swelling, and a huge belly. She couldn't stand to look at herself in the mirror, but it hurt to hear Farron's jokes about her appearance. Amara craved support and attention during this challenging time, but felt increasingly alone. Her father and Teresa were distant, and Farron, her beloved husband, was also gradually growing distant. This frightened her. Senora Sancha, the baby's grandmother, was preoccupied with her health, frequently hospitalized or in sanatoriums. One day, Farron mentioned in frustration that his mother said, 2 kids decided to have a child. Nothing good will come of it. These hurtful words felt like a stab to Amara's heart. Apparently, Senora Sancha still hadn't come to terms with her son's marriage. This realization made Amara feel sad and desolate. Then Gregoria was born, a little early but not critically so. Small, fragile, and with a strong voice. Holding her daughter for the first time, Amara forgot all her worries and sorrows. She had never felt such joy. Gregoria. Amara decided to name her daughter this. Little Gregoria looked at her mother, studying her face, getting to know her closest person. Amara was overwhelmed with feelings. She had never loved anyone this much. Farron, although he had dreamed of a son, seemed happy with their daughter. "I'll teach her to play football anyway," he told Amara, taking the tiny bundle from her hands. Farron organized a beautiful discharge from the hospital, balloons, flowers, music. Senora Sancha also came, handing the young mother a large gift bag. It contained surprises not only for the newborn but also for Amara, which was touching and pleasant. Senora Sancha beamed with happiness, looking at her little granddaughter. It was the first time she showed such strong emotions. Amara loved seeing this. Farron and his mother shared her joy and clearly loved Gregoria. However, Amara's father and stepmother didn't come. They were too busy with their children and work. Amara wasn't surprised or hurt by this. Her father and stepmother had long been almost strangers to her. The day stretched on, filled with the cares of a newborn, sleepless nights, and worries about the baby. Gregoria turned out to be fussy. Maybe her tummy hurt, or maybe something else was wrong. She cried often and slept little. This became a real trial for Amara, but she tried to endure it steadfastly. Farron, however, clearly did not envision fatherhood like this. Where had his excitement about the baby gone? His daughter's crying didn't just concern him, it irritated him. He started sleeping in the living room with the doors closed and even wore earplugs to block out the noise. "I have to work in the morning, I earn the money, don't forget that," he would angrily tell Amara. "So, you, calm her down. I need to sleep." Amara neither argued nor got upset. Instead, she felt guilty for not being able to provide peace at home and saw herself as a bad mother. So many responsibilities had fallen on her at once. The baby constantly soiled her diapers, needed to be fed on schedule, taken to the clinic, nurtured, and treated. There were also daily walks, as Gregoria only slept peacefully outside. Sometimes Senora Sancha would come over, always with gifts. She would smile at her granddaughter, talk to her in a gentle voice, and the baby would immediately calm down. In those moments, Amara could take a bit of a breather. Despite her cold and prim demeanor, Senora Sancha clearly had a warm affection for her granddaughter. And Gregoria, sensing this, would smile at her grandmother and reach out with her tiny hands. Senora Sancha now helped the young couple a little financially, buying groceries, clothes, and medicines for Gregoria. But she couldn't give much, as she was seriously ill herself. Most of her money went to her treatment, and she couldn't physically help the young mother with the baby either. Or perhaps she simply didn't want to. Amara was still guessing. Senora Sancha seemed to adore her granddaughter but remained cold towards her daughter-in-law, likely unable to accept that her son had married someone not up to her standards. Farron, who had promised to move mountains for the child, wasn't keen on fulfilling his promises. He still worked at a low-paying, easy job, refused to consider extra work, and no longer attended job interviews. "I'm tired," he explained to Amara. "I'm exhausted. The baby is constantly crying. I can't relax at home. How can I do anything in this state?" Farron increasingly didn't come home at night, disappearing for days with friends from Friday evening to Sunday morning, bars, parties. Meanwhile, Amara was left alone with a restless child. Sometimes she didn't even have time to cook, let alone clean the house, which annoyed Farron even more. "The house is always dirty, and there's nothing to eat. I'm sick of sausages and pasta. It's hard for me to manage everything. Gregoria is teething and fussy. How do others manage? Everyone has kids, but their homes are clean, and food is prepared. You stay at home all day. How hard can it be to keep things in order?" These words from her husband made Amara feel even more worthless and guilty. She tried her best, but she still couldn't manage everything. One day, Farron announced that he wanted to live separately. "My mother is being admitted to a hospital in Madrid again. She'll be away for almost a month, so I'll stay in her apartment." "A whole month?" "Yes, I need to rest and recuperate. I work from morning till night, and then there's no peace at home." Farron packed his things and moved out. Amara, with some internal intuition, understood this was the end. She immediately thought of another woman, and it turned out to be true. Farron had indeed met a woman in a club. Catalina was 10 years older, divorced, wealthy, and independent. She had 2 children from her ex-husband, a big businessman. She worked as the chief accountant in an IT firm, earning a fabulous salary. She could afford many things, including a young, handsome lover. Farron captivated her with his looks and charisma. It was no surprise, he still looked like a TV heartthrob. Farron offered Catalina youth, beauty, and passion, while she offered him money. Farron invited his new acquaintance to his mother's apartment because Catalina didn't want to invite him to her place with her children. Their relationship developed rapidly. Amara found out that her husband was at an expensive resort from his social media. Farron posted a selfie against the backdrop of a luxurious beach. Bronze tan, branded shirt. To say that Amara was surprised is an understatement. She didn't know about Catalina yet, and her husband didn't answer her calls. Farron returned home tanned, radiant, and somehow completely alien. He explained the situation to his wife. "You see, I've fallen in love for the first time in my life. It happens. You shouldn't hold me back, we're getting a divorce." "But what about me? What about Gregoria?" Amara was in despair. She frantically thought about how she would live on. The baby had just turned 1, she was too young and sickly for daycare. Amara couldn't work and had no one to turn to for help. How would she pay the rent and buy groceries? Farron's salary was small, but it had helped them stay afloat, and Amara's own savings had long since dwindled. And Amara had hoped that everything would be fine with Farron. She understood they were going through a tough period, financial difficulties, a young child. But these were ordinary domestic challenges, they would pass. Everything would be okay. It had to be okay. Amara dreamed that when Gregoria grew a little, they would all walk together around the city, sit in cafes, and go to the amusement park. But now what? Alone again, with a small child in her arms. "I love her, I'm crazy about her," Farron continued, not understanding the pain his words caused his wife. "And besides, spouses aren't each other's property. And I won't stop being Gregoria's father, I'll help her." Amara shook her head, she had serious doubts about that. Even as her husband, Farron hadn't tried very hard for the family. And now, with a new woman, there was no hope. In the end, Farron packed his things and left, moving in with Catalina. He was probably truly happy with her. Occasionally, photos and videos from parties and resorts would appear on his social media. Farron seemed to fit right in. And Amara, she was left alone with a heap of problems. First, she needed to buy expensive medicines for Gregoria. Second, the rent payment was coming due. Help came from a completely unexpected place for Amara. One morning, Senora Sancha appeared at her apartment. It was strange. Her mother-in-law had never visited them, it was always Amara and Farron who visited her. She looked pale and somewhat bewildered. Amara knew from Farron that Senora Sancha had recently undergone another heart surgery and probably hadn't fully recovered yet. As I suspected, it happened, the elderly woman shook her head sadly. "Do you think I was wrong when I said Farron got married too early? And especially to have children? I doubt he will ever grow up to such responsibility. I very much doubt it." Amara lowered her eyes, wondering if her mother-in-law had come to reproach her. "Farron is an immature person. He only cares about partying. He married you just to prove to me that he's grown up and independent. I suspect he wanted a child for the same reason. No, we were in love and I know better." Senora Sancha cut her off decisively. At that moment, sleepy Gregoria approached them. Seeing her grandmother, the little girl smiled and reached out her hands. Senora Sancha also smiled widely. Beside Gregoria, she didn't resemble a stern countess at all. She picked up the girl, sat her on her lap, and began to stroke her hair. "The reason I came is that you and Gregoria clearly need help. Am I right?" Amara nodded, there was no point in denying it. She couldn't handle the situation on her own. I know you can't rely on your parents. Farron told me your story. It's sad, truly. But I was also an outcast in my own family, so I understand what you're going through. Really? Amara was surprised. Yes. I even had a stepmother and 2 stepsisters, just like in Cinderella. And I, like you, once found myself alone with a child. The difference is, by that time, I had a managerial position, lived in my own apartment, was financially stable, and much older. But still. So, you see, we have a lot in common. Amara looked at her mother-in-law as if seeing her for the first time. She realized she knew nothing about her. In short, Senora Sancha concluded decisively, you and Gregoria are moving in with me. At least for the time being, until you get back on your feet. Amara stood there, thunderstruck. Her mother-in-law? She had always kept her distance, they barely spoke, and now this. Senora Sancha was offering help, and what an offer. Amara had been racking her brains on how to extend the rent and avoid ending up on the street with a child. This was like a gift from fate. Amara's life changed once again. At Senora Sancha's, she felt comfortable and at peace. Mother-in-law? No, they never became close, but they were at least pleasant neighbors. Amara and Gregoria were given a separate room, the largest and brightest. Senora Sancha took her granddaughter for walks, giving Amara a chance to rest and handle her own affairs. However, the elderly woman often had to be hospitalized as her health deteriorated. Amara and Gregoria visited her regularly. Farron was wrong. His mother might not have been emotional, affectionate, or talkative, but she was reliable and decent, which mattered much more. The only problem was the catastrophic lack of money. Farron lived it up with his new fling, as evidenced by photos on his social media. Officially, he wasn't employed, he had quit his previous job, so the alimony Amara received was a fixed amount. It was a pittance, not even enough for bread and milk. Meanwhile, Farron drove expensive cars, wore branded clothes, and visited the world's most famous resorts. Senora Sancha was ashamed of her son's behavior, and Amara could see it. What can you do with jeans? The mother-in-law would sometimes say, spreading her hands. His father was the same way, fluttered through life like a butterfly, didn't acknowledge responsibility, and wasn't interested in Farron. Disappeared as soon as he learned of my pregnancy. And how many Farrons like him were there across the country? I never counted on him, I saw right away what kind of man he was. The child allowance Amara received didn't help much either. Senora Sancha's pension went towards her own treatment. Amara started considering a side job. But who would hire her with a small child? Gregoria wasn't even old enough for daycare yet. A solution came from Senora Sancha's neighbor, who was aware of their situation. My granddaughter started first grade this year, she told Amara during a walk in the yard with her daughter. Well, the question arose, who would take and pick up the child? My son and daughter-in-law work, we, the grandparents, live far away. So we started looking for a nanny. We found a young woman who is on maternity leave, and she watches over our Carlotta for good money. My kids are happy to pay her, she's a good, decent woman. It's not easy to find a proper nanny either. Maybe you could do the same. I could, of course. Amara beamed. Why hadn't she thought of this herself? Listen, when you post the ad, make sure to mention you have a teaching degree. It's a huge plus for you. That evening, Amara posted ads on several platforms. Calls started coming in right away. Amara thought she would find a job immediately. But in reality, it was more complicated. Either the conditions didn't suit Amara, or something didn't fit for the employers. For example, not everyone wanted to hire a nanny with a child in tow. And Amara couldn't manage it any other way. Then, one day, a call came from an unknown number. Almost losing hope, Amara answered the phone. Hello, a woman's voice said on the other end. I'm calling about the nanny position. The conversation was long and detailed. They needed a nanny for a 4-year-old boy named Montez. An unusual boy. He didn't have a specific diagnosis, but he was very withdrawn. He became like that right after his mother died. He was only a year and a half then, but he still felt and seemed to understand everything. A smiling, open-to-the-world toddler turned into an indifferent, emotionless little human. The best doctors worked with Montez. His father could afford the most renowned neurologists and experienced professors, but nothing changed. The boy didn't want to communicate with anyone except a limited circle of people. His father, the housekeeper Dolorita, who was like a grandmother to him. It was she who called, looking for a nanny. And that was it. The boy seemed to ignore everyone else. You see, we're looking for someone who can find a way to connect with the boy, Dolorita explained. Many nannies have tried to befriend Montez. He rejects them all, doesn't want to interact with them. But the boy needs to socialize, school is not far off. We are simply desperate. I would be happy to meet Montez, Amara replied. She became curious. It was like a challenge, a difficult task that had to be solved, and Amara really wanted everything to work out for her. But you understand, I'm not alone, I have a child. My daughter just turned 1. That doesn't matter, Dolorita assured her. If you are suitable for us, it doesn't matter at all, believe me. And so, Amara stood on the porch of a huge mansion. It was like another world. A well-kept garden, gravel paths, a small fountain in front of the gate. Everywhere was quiet and peaceful. Amara even felt a little timid. Dolorita opened the door for her, smiled when she saw the baby in the potential nanny's arms. What a sweet girl, said the housekeeper, letting the guests in. I really hope you will stay with us. In the spacious living room, a small boy sat on a soft couch. Tiny, very thin. Light hair, dark intelligent eyes, but very sad. This is our Montez, Dolorita patted the boy on the head. Say hello. The child didn't respond, but he did glance at Amara. She gave him a sincere smile. Her heart ached with pity for this little one. Suddenly, Montez jumped off the couch, approached the potential nanny, and patted Gregoria's chubby hand. The baby gurgled in response, and the boy smiled. It might not seem like much, but Dolorita clutched her heart from the overflow of emotions. It's a miracle. I don't even remember the last time he smiled at anyone. Well, sometimes at his father, but this. Maybe you are the right fit for us. And so, Amara became a nanny. Senora Sancha was pleased that her daughter-in-law had found a job. Well done, Amara. Now you'll be fine even if something happens to me. Don't think about bad things, Amara begged. She didn't even want to imagine something terrible happening to Farron's mother. She hoped that the treatment would help after all. There was no warmth between them, but still, Senora Sancha, Amara, and Gregoria, they were somehow together, one against the whole world, holding on together. Besides, only her mother-in-law extended a helping hand to Amara in a difficult situation. And Amara couldn't help but appreciate that. Now, every morning, a car picked up Amara and Gregoria, and the driver took them to Montez. The boy eagerly awaited his nanny. She knew so many fun games, and most importantly, she loved him, Montez. The other nannies, the others, they were nasty, with cold looks and fake smiles. Montez couldn't stand them, but Amara was a completely different matter. Gregoria. Montez took such touching care of the baby, he made sure she didn't fall, played ball with her. The girl burst into laughter, and Amara and Montez exchanged smiles. The boy was thawing before their eyes. Amara didn't even understand how she was different from the nannies who had tried to find happiness in this house before. Some of them even had degrees in psychology, but Montez ignored these women, refusing to be left alone with them. But with Amara, he spent whole days in the park, played, and learned to read and write. And Amara didn't make any special efforts. Maybe it was also because of Gregoria? Montez behaved like a loving, caring older brother with her. It was cute and amusing. Dolorita couldn't get enough of her favorite boy, and she became very attached to Gregoria too. She gave her cute gifts and called her a beloved girl. Soon, the four of them were almost like one family, forming warm and kind relationships. For a long time, Amara didn't see the owner of the house, the boy's father. He owned a chain of car dealerships and spent most of his time at the head office. His work was such that he returned home late, by which time Amara and Gregoria had already left. One morning, as usual, coming to Montez, Amara saw him, Señor Pueblo. For some reason, she had imagined him completely differently, strong, tall, with a serious, stern look, a severe crease between his eyebrows. But in front of her stood a young man, slender, blue-eyed, smiling. Somehow, the employer didn't inspire much awe, fear, or anxiety. "Hello," he greeted Amara. "Finally, I get to meet the person who performed this miracle with my son." Montez now interacts with people, smiles, talks a lot. And he's learned so much. "I've wanted to thank you for a long time." Amara smiled back, his words were pleasant to her. And she was, of course, very happy for Montez. Amara quietly stepped out of her youngest daughter Rosa's bedroom, their daughter with Pueblo. The now grown-up Gregoria and Montez were still awake, watching cartoons in the living room with their father. Pueblo made no distinction between his own children and Gregoria, he loved them all equally. He tried to give them all attention despite his busy work schedule. Everything happened so quickly for them back then. Amara and Pueblo met, talked, and immediately realized they were made for each other. Just like in a fairy tale. It seemed there were differences in age, financial status, and completely different backgrounds. And yet, both of them, literally from the first glance, felt a kinship of souls. It was indescribable. At first, Amara tried to keep her distance. She understood how it looked, a poor woman with a child snagged a wealthy man. She didn't want people to think that about them. She didn't want Pueblo to think that about her, even for a moment. But the man managed to make Amara overcome this barrier, and the stereotypes suddenly became unimportant to her. What mattered was Pueblo. And also Montez, Gregoria, their feelings. Her mother-in-law was genuinely happy for her daughter-in-law. Señora Sancha's condition was deteriorating. She feared that soon Amara and Gregoria would be left completely alone. But now there was a reliable person beside her daughter-in-law and granddaughter, and the elderly woman's heart was at peace. Pueblo also helped Señora Sancha. He sent her to an expensive clinic for treatment. The woman was given therapy and assured that she would live for many more years. At least, she would definitely see her grandchildren get married. Amara was very grateful to her husband for this. Señora Sancha often visited the young family, or Amara with the children visited her. The elderly woman literally blossomed around the children. She could have long conversations with the sensible Montez or play dolls with Gregoria. She never got tired of it. Then Rosa was born and brought even more happiness to the family. Montez, already an experienced older brother, became Amara's best helper. He would rock the stroller, iron the diapers, and hand over the baby wipes. Farron? He lived his own life, bright and beautiful. He continued to post picturesque photos on social media and updated his statuses, each one more extravagant than the last. And recently, very recently, he called Amara. Farron knew nothing about the changes in her life. He hadn't spoken to his mother for a long time. Whenever she heard her son's voice, she would start scolding him for betraying the family. Eventually, Farron stopped calling her altogether. What was the point? Who likes to hear such things? But here he was, suddenly calling, saying he wanted to meet and talk. He wanted to know how his daughter was doing, the daughter he had been paying child support for all these years. Not much, but still. Amara smiled, listening to her ex-husband. She knew Farron well and understood what he wanted. Farron loved to show off and make an impression. He probably thought his ex-wife was living in poverty with the child in her arms. And here he would come, all handsome and successful. Apparently, he got bored of his usual thrills. He came for a new dose of surprise and admiration. Well, the meeting set for tomorrow morning promised to be interesting. Farron and Amara agreed to meet at a cafe. The very one where they once loved to have breakfast. Back in those days when they both thought they were meant for each other. Amara deliberately delayed a bit. As she parked in the lot, she saw Farron through the glass wall of the cafe. He was sitting at a table, all dressed up. Amara smirked. Yes, her ex-husband had not lost his flair for drama. Farron glanced at Amara's car. He couldn't see the driver, he just liked looking at beautiful cars. And then Amara opened the door and gracefully stepped onto the sidewalk. The surprised look on Farron's face gave her immense pleasure. They talked briefly. They didn't really have much to discuss. Gregoria didn't interest Farron, as it turned out. He wasn't eager to see his daughter. Which was for the best. Besides, the girl already had a father. A true parent is the one who raises the child. Of course, Farron deflated when he learned about Amara's story. He had clearly imagined their meeting quite differently, and now he was so disappointed. He failed to make the desired impression on his ex-wife. In this whole story, Farron didn't come off looking too good. Amara left the cafe with a light heart and a smile on her lips. At home, her children and beloved husband awaited her, who had taken the day off work to spend with the family. They planned to visit a water park, and later they should visit Senora Sancha. She had been inviting them for a while. She promised to make pancakes. Montez and Gregoria just loved them.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.